one of our federally required documents. As an MPO, and especially an MPO of our size, representing a metropolitan area of over 200,000 people, one of the things we're required to maintain is a congestion management process. Those of you who've been around for a long time, we've always kind of talked about congestion in, some terms that aren't necessarily consistent with the new federal legislation and how we as an MPO need to have an ongoing process to assess and evaluate congestion in the region. So Andrew Tracy has spent the last year working with our staff and others to develop a draft congestion management process methodology, some existing conditions. And today we're sort of introducing this. This is a very dense document. So we're actually breaking this up into two meetings. One is for this initial introduction. The TIP task force will be taking on some of the conversation in October regarding implementation of this plan, and then we'll be coming back to you in November with a complete full document for release for public review at that time. So with that, I will turn it over to Andrew. Jenna, if you could let me know if this is broadcasting properly, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
You can go ahead and click over to my first slide. So today I'm going to give you an overview of the congestion management process.
Excuse me, Andrew. Sorry,
Yeah.
we can't see your slides.
Okay.
Oh. See you now, Jen?
Yes, yep, all set.
Okay, we all set?
Yep.
In the mail out, there was the full PDF of the full methodology documents. Very lengthy, great coffee table read. I'm going to give you a quick overview today of the process and what we hope to achieve with it. The document is full of lots of great facts and figures and charts and graphs. Each year in the capital region, all of our residents take about 1.2 billion trips by all modes. We take almost 100 million trips over the Hudson River and 84 million over the Mohawk River. And our best estimate is that the traffic congestion we encounter adds about 16.5 million hours of extra travel time to everyone in the capital region each year. And this costs us an additional $323 million a year in the value of wasted time. And then there's additional costs associated with congestion or delayed freight and things of that nature that are more challenging to estimate. But as a floor, that's about what it costs us. So if you click through to the next slide, what is the congestion management process? So as Sandy mentioned, this is required for all transportation management area MPOs with at least 200,000 population. The congestion management process is a systematic approach to managing congestion using accurate and up-to-date transportation system performance data to identify congestion problems and to implement congestion management strategies. That's straight from the Federal Highway Administration's congestion management process guidance. So we have developed this process that follows this short checklist here. The CMP shall identify congested locations in the region. We have a list of congestion management strategies. I'll show you many of those in a moment. The CMP will recommend the most effective strategies for treating each congested location we identify. And finally, it will program and implement these congestion management strategies. So per the federal regs, the CMP is integrated with many of our other planning documents. It draws regional objectives from our long-range metropolitan plan, which is New Visions. And it also feeds back into New Visions. It provides performance measures and strategies for New Visions and for the TIP as well. So you can go ahead to the next slide. Federal Highway has this recommended 8-step performance-based planning process that we follow for the CMP. Begins with defining regional objectives. And again, we've drawn those from New Visions. The primary objective is to improve mobility and accessibility in the region. But we've also adopted several other objectives reducing vehicle emissions, improving vehicle safety, and so on. We have defined our CMP network. Again, details are in the PDF. Long story short, we've included every road that might have traffic. Develop multimodal performance measures. So the CMP is supposed to be very multimodal. We've pulled in performance measures relating to transit ridership and transit performance and freights and non-motorized travel as well. But if you click just once, we're going to focus on these 3 steps today. Collecting data, analyzing congestion problems, and identifying strategies to treat the congestion. So we'll skip right to that. If you click one more time. This is the congestion management process network we've identified on the right. It includes all interstate highways, nearly all signalized corridors in the region. We included all signalized roadways with at least 10,000 AADT. And we also identified these downtown zones where we have dense grids of signals. And we'll have strategies relating to operating those grids of signals more efficiently. So we've identified, again, multimodal performance measures at the regional level and at the corridor level as well. So the regional level includes the required measures that we're required by US DOT to monitor over time. These mostly relate to the performance of the NHS, just the National Highway System. But we've identified additional regional levels, including total delay, total vehicle emissions, transit ridership, and many others. At the corridor level, we've looked at individual roadway segments, and we've pulled data on the reliability of travel times on those segments and also the total magnitude of delay on those segments as well. And that was our main data source for identifying where the congested locations are. So we have access to the National Performance Management Research Dataset, NPM-RDS. This is provided for the whole country by US DOT. They purchase mobility data from big data vendors, and they make it available to us for congestion planning. It's an excellent data source. We can click on any road in the region, and dating back to 2016, we can tell you what the travel time on that road was. Any time of day, any day of the year. So this is sort of the ultimate data set for congestion planning. So you click through the next slide. In the report, we have lots of performance measures. I won't go through all of them today. Here's some examples. We have performance measures relating to non-motorized travel. We use the big data vendor Replica to estimate how many walking and biking trips there are in the region. We have data on CO2 emissions that also comes from the NPM-RDS. We have data from CDTA on transit ridership, many other things. We'll be tracking these over time. Many of these, we have good data dating back a few years, so you can see the historical trend lines in the report as well. Pictured here on the right, total excessive delay. It was high, and then COVID happened, and then it's recovered somewhat. And we'll keep an eye on this in the future to see if we're ever going to have more delay than the pre-COVID baseline. On the next slide, we have two maps. This is on the left is the total excessive delay on every roadway in the CMP network. Total excessive delay is calculated as time spent traveling below a certain speed threshold, so it's 60% of the speed limit. And the roadways marked in red are the roads with the highest total excessive delay per mile of roadway. We've normalized per mile because each segment is a different way. So you can see some familiar areas in red. I'll show you some closer shots on the next few slides. Pictured here on the right is the level of travel time reliability. There's a lot of emphasis from Federal Highway on planning for reliability. If you know you're going to run into traffic, you can plan for it and it's not as disruptive. If you don't know you're going to run into traffic, you can't plan for it and it's far more disruptive to your schedule. So a lot of the guidance coming from Federal Highway and a lot of our peer agencies focus on using these reliability-based measures for congestion planning. So the roadways in purple were the ones where reliability was the worst. So if you click to the next slide, Step 5 is using all of this data to identify our congestion problems and needs. So we're looking at the data, but we're also looking at 4 other sources to source our congestion problems and needs. We didn't want to look just at the data because we know that doesn't tell the whole story. We wanted to talk to our stakeholders as well. So we did a series of stakeholder outreach meetings. Everyone on the planning committee got an email back in April, and we got a lot of stakeholder feedback from that. So thank you very much. We've been speaking to our ROSAC, our Regional Operations and Safety Advisory Committee, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback from them as well. And we had some focused stakeholder meetings with CDTA and DOT as well. So all of that is incorporated into the reports. We did a big public survey, so I'll show you that in a couple of slides. We have traffic forecasts. Those are still a work in progress, so working on finalizing those, but we wanted to identify locations that aren't congested now, but might be in the coming years. And then finally, we took a look at which congested locations also happen to fall into our environmental justice areas. I'll show you that as well, but quite a few of them do. So the next 4 slides, we can go through these pretty quickly. If you take a look at the online map, which was linked in the agenda, you can zoom in on your town and see the data up close. But essentially, we identified congested locations in each of our 4 counties. So beginning with Albany County, many of the congested locations are listed here. There's more in the reports. We looked at signalized roadways and interstate highways separately. Some of the signalized roadways in Albany that came to the top of the list include Everett Road, Troy-Schenectady Road near the Single Point Interchange, US 9 and Northern Boulevard and Henry Johnson Boulevard in Albany, Central Avenue, of course, Albany Shaker Road in the vicinity of I-87. And quite a few more. Please take a look at the full report to see the full list, including the interstate highway locations as well. The next slide has Rensselaer County. Rensselaer County, the interstates performs very well compared to the other counties, but there were quite a few signalized roadways with high traffic. US 4 in North and East Greenbush. This is a growth area. Hoosick Street and Hoosick Road, to no one's surprise, is very close to the top of the list. US 4 in Troy, and this one was a bit of a surprise. Northern Drive in Troy as well was high up on the list. Relatively low traffic, but very unreliable travel times on that road. So it rose to the top of the list. In Saratoga County, some congested locations were identified on the Northway, mainly southbound was a little worse than northbound. In terms of signalized roadways, New York 146 in Clifton Park, New York 50 up north by Saratoga Springs and Wilton, Broadway, and a few other roads in Saratoga Springs, and then a few sections of Route 9 as well were identified as having high delay and poor reliability. And finally, in Schenectady County, some congested locations were identified on I-890. And in terms of signalized roadways, Balltown Road rose pretty high on the list, and also the section of Schenectady in the vicinity of the I-90 ramps and near the Schenectady County Community College and State Street, that whole area showed up as very high delay as well. So again, take a look at the full report, take a look at the online maps if you're interested. We did a public survey over this summer, May through August. We had an online mapping tool. Members of the public could go on and put pins on the map and write comments. So this was open, as I said, May through August. We had 231 responses from 52 zip codes, so we got a great response. Pictured here on the left, these are the 407 congested locations that were reported to us. On the right, I just made a density map so you can see which locations got the most reports. The spots marked in purple and blue, that was the highest density of reports with 10 or more members of the public complaining about the same spots. For the most part, this overlapped very well with travel time data. But there were a few locations that were identified by the public that didn't rise to the top of the list for data. Five Corners in Rotterdam was one of them. We understand there was a temporary signal there this summer that might have contributed to some of these reports. There's an Aldi opening up there as well, so now it's actually Six Corners. Western and New Garner and Guilderland got a lot of reports. Central Ave, of course, a few different roads in Albany, Lark Street, Madison, and New Scotland all got reports. And then several other roadways that we saw from the data. In terms of equity and environmental justice, we overlaid the map of high delay roadways on top of the EJ map. And almost all of the high congested locations were in these census tracts identified as environmental justice areas in the report we put out earlier this year. So this, I think, suggests that traffic disproportionately impacts individuals who live in these environmental justice areas. It can make getting to work or crossing the street as a pedestrian very challenging and potentially very hazardous. So we wanted to highlight this in the report as well. Moving on to the congestion management strategies. So in the report, we have detailed write-ups on lots of different strategies available to treat congestion. Every strategy will do one or more of the following things. We want to focus on getting more performance from the infrastructure we have, and we can do this with intelligent transportation technology, smarter traffic signals, things of that nature. Many strategies focus on providing choices, transit and non-motorized travel, but also things like flexible work and work from home would fall into that category. Advancing technology, we focus a lot on these ITS strategies and also these management and operations TISMO strategies as well. Diverse and compact developments, the closer everything is, the shorter your trips are. And adding capacity only where needed. According to the federal guidance, adding capacity is seen as kind of a last resort due to being the most costly measure, and also the measure that needs, ongoing maintenance to be paid over the life cycle of the project. So if we add capacity, we can be smart about it. We can do spot widenings to treat congestion bottlenecks on roadways that otherwise have capacity to spare. You don't want to fix one bottleneck if it's just going to move it 300 feet down the street. And also strategies like new service roads can be built to relieve congestion on a congested parallel road while also opening up for additional infill development. So if you go to the next slide, we have lots of strategies detailed in the report. They fall into these 8 categories. ITS and TISMO, these are all the operations strategies. Transportation demand management, this refers to carpooling, van pooling, work from home, things of that nature. Public transit, bicycle and pedestrian, access management, land use parking, and roadway capacity strategies. So I won't go through all of them today. I just wanted to highlight one of the categories, which was ITS and TISMO, Transportation Systems Management and Operations. So in the report, we have write-ups for all of the strategies listed here. Many of them have links you can click that will open up more information from Federal Highway or other resources on these strategies. One of the ongoing challenges of the CMP will be to identify what the right strategies are for each location, and that'll be part of the ongoing congestion management process that will take into the next year. So my final slide, what are the next steps? We're going to finalize our traffic forecast using our travel demand model, try to identify locations that aren't congested now, but will be in the coming years. We'll be working, as Sandy mentioned, with our TIP task force to finalize step 7, which is programming and implementation, identifying potential funding sources. Something we'd like to do is try to leverage the CMP to be more competitive for discretionary funding. So maybe we fund design of an operations project, and when that's complete, we can pursue discretionary grants, pull in additional new money to the MPO. Please view the online map if you're interested. That's linked in the agenda as well. And following CMP adoption, this will be an ongoing process. So we'll do an annual refresh of all the congestion data. see what's changed. We'll make strategy recommendations for each facility that we identified in the CMP network. And we'll also do some field visits before and after studies, things of that nature to help us identify, what the right congestion treatments are and to see what works and what doesn't in our region. So that was all for me. Thank you very much for your time. And if anyone has any questions, be happy to answer. Sure. Go ahead.
I was wondering if you related some of this data to accident and pedestrian death. I know congestion, you think they're slowing down, but they're usually angrier, and if they get a chance to go, they go and, make unsafe conditions.
Right, so we do have performance measures relating to the number of crashes,
Okay,
and we'll monitor those over time. Obviously, we don't want to implement a CMP strategy if we feel it might lead to an increase in crashes, so we want to be careful about that. So if you take a look at the report, we do have a few crash-related performance measures, but they're all looked at kind of the regional level, not at the level of the individual corridor. But
I think fundamentally it's sort of woven into the reliability piece of it like that.
Right.
If you don't have the recurring congestion, it's usually because of an incident or a crash that
Right.
makes it unreliable to start.
And sometimes it's counterintuitive, but for certain types of crashes, like pedestrian crashes, having congestion is actually better because it's keeping the cars artificially slower, right? So the severity of a potential crash is lower.
but it would be interesting to look at that, and is,
We are going to do that in the SS4A grant,
Okay.
in much more detail than Andrew can
Okay.
do in the CMP.
I think it's worth mentioning, a lot of these strategies, they're good for congestion. Many of them are also good for safety. For example, traffic incident management practices. There's things you can do to clear crashes more quickly when they occur and more safely. And so that'll actually reduce the secondary queue crashes that occur. When an incident occurs, there's always lots of fender benders in the queue leading up to it. So a lot of these strategies will do both congestion and safety improvements.
Andrew,
Go ahead.
did the MPO have information? I mean, I was here at the time, but similar information pre-COVID, 2018, 2019?
Yes, so the NPM RDS data, the travel time data, we have this going back to 2016. So in the report, you can see some measures were tracked starting in 2016. Many of the delay and reliability measures, they were high and then COVID happened and then they've gone up, but they haven't quite recovered pre-COVID levels yet.
I just, downtown of Schenectady is not what it was pre-COVID. So
Right.
congestion, I would think it cannot be what it was pre-COVID. So I didn't know if there was naturally a decrease in congestion over the last 4 years, or if this is just.
I think it's fair to say, Chris, that what we saw is, I'm drawing a circle on this map, but there's these outer ring suburbs out here. That's where we've seen the increases. The inner cities, we've seen a little bit of a decrease. It's still not normalized, yet, but that trend is definitely reflected there.
Yeah, if you're interested, I can pull the data all the way back to 2016 and then we can sort of look at the change over time in Schenectady. So if you touch base with me, I'd be happy to pull that data for you.
I just, and just so you can see the map that we're gonna make publicly available, as part of the public process, because again, the document is dense. It's 100 pages now. We're gonna be adding more to it. So it's a lot to digest. That's why we wanted to introduce it to you today. Give you folks a chance to ask the kinds of questions you're asking about the data and, what else we should or shouldn't be showing in the report at this point. But again, these interactive maps will allow you to click into. I'll just zoom into Schenectady just because you mentioned it, but you can kind of zoom in here. You can click on your street and get a wealth of information. There's different layers you can turn on and off. So you can definitely see, but the nice part about this comprehensive look at the region is it's all compared with each other, right? So we have the data in a way that, we're not just saying because someone says it's bad, it's bad. We actually now have metrics that kind of visualize and help communicate where, we do know we have a couple of problem spots. But, relative, one of the things we're also going to include in the report is when you look at peer regions, we're still way better in a lot of ways. And that was even reflected in some of the public comment we got, people who said, I lived in another place that was way worse than here, right? So we're gonna pepper this with some context as well, so that we're not making it seem like things are, slipping off the deep end in the region.
Right, we don't have the traffic that Long Island or Los Angeles has, but the good news is, I think a lot of the traffic we see is much more treatable than it is in Southern California. And a lot of the strategies are very cost effective, things like smarter traffic signal technology. They can improve the reliability of flow on the signalized roadways where we see the most delay in our region. Without needing $1 billion interstate highway, for example.
But I mean, ultimately, what we're trying to get to is something that supports the infrastructure committee. I mean, it all comes to project selection eventually here, and whether this could become a metric of, if we do a design only for, a bottleneck that would just is beyond the resources of program allocations, that may be something here. But somehow weaving this into the project selection piece is ultimately, where we want to get.
Right, most MPOs that have a CMP also have access, direct access to CMAQ funding, congestion mitigation and air quality funding. That's the main funding source used by most MPOs. We don't have that here because unfortunately our air quality is very good and we're not in a non-attainment area. So because of that, I think Bob has Bob's idea of pursuing discretionary funding, bringing new funding into the TIP is very good. I think that's a great way to approach implementation.
I do want to also point out that one of the things that these congestion management strategies can support is our climate work, right? So, whether it's the current EPA pollution reduction grant program, Andrew mentioned the carbon reduction program through federal highway, there are other ways that we can tackle and implement some of the ideas in the CMP outside of traditional federal highway transportation things. So, keep that in mind too, when you're working in your climate smart communities programming in your local government or some of the other programs that you're working on locally. There's other ways to integrate some of these ideas into those efforts.
Maybe can I ask a question to that point? When can we start publicly hearing this? So we're doing a CAP and I would love to share this with the engineers that we're hiring.
This is public now. This is I'll call it a preliminary draft report,
Okay.
right? So it's still work in progress, but yeah, you're welcome to share the map and the report that we have available to date. And as I said, when we hit November, we'll come back to you guys with the kind of solid draft and then do a more robust public process in November, December, prior to the plan policy board meeting.
All right, Andrew, thank you. I do have one question for you, maybe two. This is a great visualization. It's going to help with a lot of applications, whether it's TAP CMAQ or something else at the federal level.
Okay.
Is this data lend itself to taking subsections of the corridor out and extracting them for specific targeted grant applications?
Yeah, so the underlying base network here is the INRIX network. They're one of the big data vendors that US DOT buys this data from. So you can, the links are of different lengths, but usually in like a downtown area, it might just be a block or two, and then out in a rural area, it might be a few miles. But you can see, especially near intersections, you can see where the links are very, very small. So this is, I think, US 4 in North Greenbush here. So you can see the segments approaching this intersection are tiny. So they actually made the turning lanes their own segments. So it's very high resolution data. And then I think if you were to just click on any one of these, you could see what length that segment is.
But you couldn't necessarily take half of that Route 4 orange section and just analyze that half. It would come as the whole segment, correct?
Right. If it was all one length, then that's the finest resolution that the data is delivered in.
Good stuff.
Hey, question?
Yeah, can you just explain the reliability numbers again?
Sure.
The higher the reliability number, the less reliable
Yeah, if you'd like, you could actually turn off the delay map and turn on the LOTTR, level of travel time reliability.
Yeah, this is a challenging concept to explain.
So a reliability score of 1.0, that's the best possible score. What that means is that the trip will always take what you think it's gonna take. The way this is actually calculated is they look at all the travel times on that link. And they divide the 80th percentile travel time over the average speed. And what that essentially is in plain English is, if you make that drive on that road 5 days a week, what's the worst one day gonna be? And how does that relate to the average travel time? So a score of 2.0 means that 1 day a week, it'll take twice as long as normal. So here on the map, I think we've highlighted everything. That's over 1.5 in orange and over 2.0 in purple there. There's a way to turn on maybe this button here, Sandy. Will turn on the, yeah, there's the legend there. So on a roadway that's orange, about 1 day a week, it'll take you somewhere between 1.5 and 2 times as long as it normally takes to go through that road. So generally, signalized intersections, you know, they've got some purple. And then the orange, you know, looks like there's low orange on Central Ave and other roads here in Albany. But that's essentially what that means. A higher score means the travel is more unpredictable and unreliable.
Any other questions? Right, hearing none, thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to some administration. Previous meeting minutes, everyone had a chance to look at them. Did we hear any corrections, additions, subtractions to the minutes? Hearing none, looking for a motion. Chris?
Sector.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Next, we're gonna tip fiscal constraint update from Jacob.
Let me open it for you.
So as always, we're to start the meeting with looking at our fiscal constraint. Made quite a few changes to it this month, just because we're at the beginning of the new federal fiscal year. Really, we'll go into it a little bit more actually later in the meeting, but we had to make quite a few project selection changes for our TIP and STIP performance. So I'm just gonna go over that a little bit. What you'll see first kind of so we're now in federal fiscal year 2024, year 2 of the TIP. So if you actually go down to the bottom there, you can see that we're, you know, our budget estimates and programming is around 65 million compared to around 100 or 120 million for other years of the TIP. So really what that means is that we've recently pushed out about $60 million of programming. And so with that, we had to move budget estimates as well. So we've kind of shifted things around. But just kind of the key points is, you know, we're still within our, or under 5% over programming for any given year of TIP. So we're kind of within our threshold that we give ourselves. So that's the good news. Kind of the maybe worse news, or just something that we're kind of keeping an eye on. If you scroll to the right, Sandy. So obviously the columns is looking at each year, and kind of our budget estimates versus our programming for each year. But all the way to our right is the budget estimate versus the programming for each federal fund source that we're looking at. So overall, even though we're just over $400,000 over programmed for the 4 years, if you look at some of those individual fund sources, we're actually slightly under programmed for NHPP, which is the top row there, and then over programmed, however, about $4 million for SDP Flex and almost or just over $6 million for SDP Urban. So as many of you know, those are kind of the fund sources that we're using for local projects. So even though our fiscal constraint is, you know, we're within our boundaries overall, we are kind of getting tight on urban and flex, which again is a lot of our local projects. So we're just kind of keeping a closer eye on that as more amendments are coming in. As you remember last, I guess it was 2 months ago, planning committee and our last policy board, we approved the use of the CRP money to offset some of those amendments for kind of eligible projects that are, typically tapped in CMAQ. But things are kind of more bike and head focused in carbon reduction. So we do have a little bit of spare there to program for some of those amendments, but even that is kind of drying up pretty quickly. So just something to think about in the future, but for now, we're still within our boundaries, in good shape.
Are there any questions for Jacob? All right, hearing none. Thank you, Jacob. We're gonna move on to the action items. First, we're gonna talk New York Route 5S pedestrian bicycle access improvements in Rotterdam. And this is Peter Comenza. You want to take it away?
Yeah, well, thanks, here with, and explain some of the issues that we ran into get the project over.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So as we've been progressing through the design phase of the project, we've become aware of concerns within the project. So namely that the existing drainage system within the corridor, which was assumed during the application process to remain intact, does need to be modified. Unfortunately, it's in varying stages of condition. So moving it is problematic and costly. Also, during the application process, it was assumed that the drainage and water main had their appropriate separation distances. It's been determined that the water main is very close proximity to the existing drainage system, violating that 10 state standard. So as we get into having to modify now the drainage system, the water main is in conflict, and we found that it's also an asbestos coated pipe. And so again, not ideal. The town is stepped up and is going through the process of replacing determining if they can replace the main, utilizing town funds, but they are looking for some additional funding to replace the drainage system within the corridor. It's definitely a beneficial project to the community. Adding a sidewalk and making modifications to the drainage system and the roadway really would benefit the community. It is a big ask. We're looking at about $1.5 million in additional funding request. And this is purely construction and inspection money. So we are not asking for any design funds. We're completing this complete drainage design utilizing the funds that were allocated in the original application. So again, it is a big ask. It's an important project to the community. During the public information meeting, the public was very engaged and supportive of the project, being that there is such a need to get the sidewalks out there. So we're hoping that the committee is going to see this request as beneficial to the project as everybody else does.
Thank you, Ed. Any questions for Ed or Peter?
I did just want to point out that the funding that's being requested is the carbon reduction program fund. So you may remember at our last meeting, as Jacob just said earlier, we have a set aside now to draw down upon for these cost increases. We are only authorized to program the first 2 years, fiscal year 22 and 23, I believe.
22 and 23.
Folded into 1 year.
Right, since we're past 22.
Right.
It's all in line 23.
So this, it's gonna take, again, almost over $1 million of those funds to this one project. I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. It's not the only ask we have, but it's the first ask we have. And we did set a policy first come first served.
Jacob, where is this fund? Is this not in the table?
So it is added to the fiscal constraint table as of this month. So if we were to go back to that table that we could show, I added it's about $7 million of carbon reduction, large urban and medium urban. So right now that's showing as unprogrammed. So it's just budget estimate with your programming. And then as these amendments come in, it'll be chipped away and just programmed up to that level.
So the other side is for 7 million.
In total, we can only spend 2.5 of large urban and 280,000 of medium urban as of right now, though. We only have access to that.
So this would essentially carve out 65% of that.
Correct. If you look, so the table we're showing now on the right. The left side of that table is kind of what we approved for carbon reduction set aside. On the right-hand side is what would be left after this amendment. So you see it taken out of the first line or the first row.
Why are they large urban?
So this is a fund source that we've talked about this in the previous meeting. It can only be spent in the designated urbanized area that is Albany Schenectady, that is the large urban. And the medium urban is specific to the Saratoga Springs urbanized area, so it can't be spent outside of those areas. So in this example, Rotterdam sits in the Albany Schenectady urbanized area, so we'd be drawing down the large urban for this.
And the drainage meets all the criteria for carbon reduction.
Yeah, so we've discussed that with DOT, and because of the larger project, it meets the criteria.
You know, Andrew, I mean, we're certainly supportive of the project. I mean, beyond the water work, there's a lot of contacts, the interface with Empire State Trail down through there. It's pretty low lying through there. I mean, we're there this time. It's time to take care of this piece. At least we've already got another state share that's as part of this project. So
In towns in Ohio, we had to go ask for money for the water, we replaced the water line there. Apparently it's a little more than 1.2 now.
So in that carbon reduction, I mean, it sort of shipped within the scope of which piece is actually the carbon reduction versus the other funding that's in it. But, you know, I mean, sort of the establishment of a hamlet type setting around a major interface of Empire State Trail. And it's I think it's beyond just the water work that's
It's
being done.
Main Street,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
it's all of the infrastructure there is old.
Yeah.
This is over 50% cost increase, so this, if approved, we'll go to the policy board for approval. With that, if there's no further discussion, looking for a motion.
One question.
Sure.
Just looking forward, how does this impact potential for other requests against the carbon reduction program? Are we going to be good as we go through each as far as drawdown?
Well, it takes 1.5 million away from a future project,
Right.
but it leaves.
And there are other.
I haven't had the opportunity to look at what's.
Yeah, there are other requests on the agenda today, so you'll see the progression as we move along.
Right, so there is another request, I think, for about 500,000,
Right.
which leaves about 500,000 remaining if that were used as well.
So we're still in the black. Okay.
Any other questions? Hearing none, looking for a motion. Andrew? Second. All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstained? All right, hearing none, motion is approved. The next one, a lot first for me, chairing and also asking for some money here today. So I am going to pass this over to Tony Christian from Creighton Manning to discuss the Columbia Street project to host.
Thank you, Joe. So what this project is, it's Columbia Street from Baker Avenue to Mohawk Street. It's about a 1.5 mile stretch of roadway. Included in the project is sidewalk repair, mill and fill of the roadway, and restriping the roadway to accommodate bike lanes. The original scope of work, we anticipated doing spot repairs of this existing sidewalks that were out there. And based on an ADA assessment, we did a walk of the entire stretch, and what we were seeing was that the majority of the sidewalks were not ADA compliant, poor condition. Some stretches were 2 to 3 feet wide. So the entire sidewalk of the stretch of the corridor needs to be replaced. There's also traffic signals that are out there that are, you know, not up to standards and need to be replaced as well. So what we're looking to do here is reconstruct the sidewalk fully, add bike lanes. And based on preliminary estimate, we did an engineer's estimate, and based on that estimate, what we're looking to do is increase construction funding. Design funding would stay the same, but increase construction funding by $500,000 through a drawdown of the CRP set aside program. There's four schools within the area, so it is a very highly walked area. A lot of school children, four schools, kids walking to different schools, elementary through high school. There's a business district, so it does get a lot of foot traffic, so the sidewalks are important to make sure there's a fully ADA compliant network for pedestrians for the community to use.
Thank you, Tony. I'd be happy to take any questions, or if there's any for Tony, feel free. Yes.
Bike lanes were mentioned, are you talking about Sharrows or?
No, said designated bike lanes. We are gonna have it on most of the corridor. There is a stretch that was recently reconstructed in the middle of Columbia that did not add them. We don't have the opportunity to add them at this point. The areas we'll be affecting, which is the 1.3 miles, we're looking to include bike lanes through.
And I'm just showing on screen, this is the impact of this request on the carbon reduction program set aside. So again, drawing down the roughly $500,000 leaves us just over $500,000 of capacity for the program year that we're authorized to assign funds to. Why we can't go any further ties into the state's carbon reduction strategy plan that's in development, which is due in November. Once that gets released, we will have an understanding at that point, and we've talked about this before, all the carbon reduction program funds have to be spent in a manner consistent with that plan. We expect that plan to be broad. We don't really have any idea what's in it quite yet. But once we see it, then we'll probably have the authorization to go ahead and program the rest of these funds. But again, in thinking about your projects or program areas, the key thing is it has to be spent in those two urbanized areas. That cannot be spent outside.
Any other questions? If not, seeking a motion. Bob? Second. All right, all in favor? Opposed or abstained? Hearing none, motion passes. Thank you all. Next, we're going to be going on to the Central Ave reconstruction project in the city of Albany. And Bill, do you want to take this over?
This is a pretty simple one. We want to combine the Central Avenue project along with the Frisbee Avenue project, so we can select one consultant to do the project and not have to work with two consultants on very similar projects. No dollars, no dollar changes, just combining the pins into one project.
Pretty straightforward. Any questions? Motion? Second? All in favor? Opposed or abstained? Hearing none, motion passes. Next, we're gonna go on to DOT, multi-site culvert replacement. Bob?
All right, another money asked, but this time not at the expense of the core program. So as some of you may be aware that the cross program, the culvert replacement on the state system, it's grounded in the sort of resiliency and the widening of a number of the culverts. There are sites in each of the 4 counties. Like the cost increase is $3.5 million there, but it is state funded, and that was off the top, so it's not at the expense of any other projects, any other core funding stuff that's on the tip.
Right, it's using the Protect program funds. So that is one of the federal funding programs that was created in the new infrastructure law. However, the New York State Department of Transportation has opted, because it's not a fund source that's required to be assigned to MPOs. They're going to program the funds at the state level. So it is state funded in the sense that it's a state
Right,
project, but it's still federally. I just want to make that clarification. And I believe this is the first Protect program project we will have on our tip.
And then approve, this would go to the policy board as well for approval.
How many funds does the DOT keep to themselves?
You'll get into that.
That would be
next
no
session.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I didn't get an answer.
Appreciate that.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, there is certainly of how, same thing with the carbon reduction. Now we're gonna talk about that with the TAP CMAX solicitation. I mean, some of that is at the discretion of the state on whether they're sub-allocated or not. And the largest need by far in some of the design challenges involve both environmental consideration as well as resiliency is the culvert program, and it's identified as a need statewide. And so that decision was made to spend that with the cross program there and sort of bundle these to try to get some economies. But any of these projects in the water, as anybody know, are become more expensive and difficult to do. So
No,
not a good answer, but
I know, but I'm just getting at when we go back to our TIP programming. And we're asking about giving the state a set aside out of the funds that the MPO has at its discretion. Are we going to get a list of programs similar to CROSS?
Given that this is a brand new program, I would assume when we get to the programming stage, there'll be something.
I'll
probably as a
tell you
placeholder.
that I get, touring route money, that, I'll put that right on the table.
you require a presentation I gave the other day.
I know.
Exactly talked about, this
I didn't remember this. I don't remember
the allocated
these little
programs.
federal pots that
You
the
know,
state said they were gonna keep to themselves. I don't remember that.
I don't. But the feds have also said that that's on the discretionary side of the house. They were not the formula funds that were disputed that become the basis of the core programming around the table. The majority of the funding increases in the new bill are on the discretionary side. And so, yeah, I mean, we always have this discussion. We never like the term set aside when it comes to the core program Cs. We more that's the preservation piece for the amount of infrastructure that we have that set aside. But
So Chris, are you just referring that to the amount of the quote unquote set aside that should be revisited at times because you feel that there's enough money elsewhere to cover things that are not, I guess, initially considered?
We're all friends around the table. My question just goes to the transparency of if there are actually federal monies that the state at a level above this table is keeping for the state. And then when they come to the table, the amounts are not at an elevated amount. And they need more programming dollars that have set asides, but we're not aware of other funds that are there. Similar with CDTA, we don't know about CDTA, there's other funds that don't come to this table that are around. The more that the table knows about all the other funds that some people don't have access to, the better that we're educated and we can program when we do tips.
But Chris, I would say the same thing about the TAP CMAC program as well as the Bridge and Work programs. If you purely put them around the table here and you draw that cut line, a lot of those projects would not necessarily make the cut. I mean, it's very purposely recognition when you're not just looking at condition rating and traffic volumes and such, that those programs are sort of set aside of it to hit more local projects that aren't DOT being submitted candidates for those things. So, yeah, I mean,
There's a balance.
It's a fair question, Chris, and I think
I think every MPO director's meeting is probably a subject of discussion about
there's
how the
a
distribution happens.
there's a program right now that you guys aren't even aware of that we happen to stumble upon that apparently has been assigned federal funds. So I mean, we as even staff to the MPO, try to keep on top of what you're describing, but there are a lot of new programs that are still being rolled out and even us staff, we're still trying to catch up. I think when we do the tip update, we'll have some information that'll kind of outline based on everything that's gone on the last couple of years. Now that we'll be a couple of years into this new legislation, kind of a better understanding of what's being kept at the state level versus coming to the MPO table. But again, some of that, the stuff that's legislated that has to come here is coming here. The things that the department has discretion over is more what Bob's saying, if there's a statewide need, they're gonna probably keep it at a statewide level and use it there first. But if there's other priorities that come out, hence like local bridges, for example, or if there's other program types where, the state has said, well, we know there's a lot of local need, that they should be distributed locally. And, we use the planning work to tap into, no pun intended, those resources, right? Because again, I think the last round of TAP CMAC, this region got almost 20% of the total statewide pot. And that's because of the planning work we're doing on this region. So, it is a balancing act, but that's why we keep emphasizing the planning to set communities up for all of these other opportunities beyond sort of the traditional NHPP and STP funds that are sub-allocated to the MPO.
So we will cross that bridge on it.
We will cross that bridge when it comes.
Right, culvert turned into a bridge because it's gotta be 1.5 times what it was. before. It's now a bridge, used to be a culvert.
All right, I'll make the motion.
Clear a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Any opposed or abstained? That motion passes and goes to the policy board. Last, we have the Keston on the Hudson Bridge over the Hudson Rehab Project. Craig Moore, if you're explaining.
That is a good question. Who is representing the throughway today? I don't see Craig. Okay, I guess we will represent them for them. Sorry about that. I was under the impression that Craig was coming today. So speaking of discretionary programs, this is one that the Thruway Authority through one of the federal discretionary programs received a significant award of from the Bridge Improvement Program, one of the discretionary competitive programs going on at the federal level, received upwards of $21 million to rehab the Castleton over the Hudson Bridge on the Berkshire Spur between the main part of the Thruway and heading out towards Massachusetts. So starting of, the Skodak Island area, that particular area. So because it is federal aid, it does need to show on our tip and it needs to be added by amendment. So the Thruways proposed this amendment. Is there something else you wanted to add there?
That's about it. 21 million of discretionary federal aid. This is also due to the size, it'll go to planning or policy board in December. New project being added, it's a totally new project.
I'm hoping for the upcoming policy board meeting that we will be inviting the Thruway Authority to talk about their overall planning in the region, given that we're doing the long range plan update, and I'm hoping to have someone do a little bit more of a presentation to talk about this project and other things going on with the Thruway, so we can all get familiar with that.
I think it'd be a good understanding of that bridge in particular. It's been under construction for a decade or more.
Yeah, it had a lot of.
So if this is a new project, what's the current project?
Right.
Which is
a
definitely
little
surface
clarity. I believe this is the eastbound lanes, and it says that they have an existing project on the westbound
Yes.
lane. So I'm not super familiar with the area, and it's been going on for 10 years, and maybe other.
Yeah.
They've been doing too.
When you're under it and you can see like through it, it makes me nervous when I drive over
Right.
it.
It's the older bridge for sure.
We need a ferry.
One is, if you scroll down a bit, you see fund source listed as local, what does that mean? And second, this improvement, is anticipated to extend the lifespan of the bridge by 50 years. How old is the bridge and what was its expected life?
If you want to take the first one, I'll look.
Yeah, so the first question, local is basically throughway funds. So for the sake of the tip, we want to show the full project cost at 43.6 million. The only federal aid piece of that is the 21 million. So basically the total construction project that we're doing is 43 million. And their award was for 21 million federal aid. So throughway funds, wherever, I'm assuming full funds, but I guess I don't know all the funds that they use.
The letter unfortunately doesn't say the age of the bridge, but just local knowledge, I believe that stretch of the Thruway was probably completed in the 1960s. So I would have to imagine the bridge dates to it from at least that point.
Sorry.
Is there someone online?
Yeah, hi, this is Al Mastriani with the Thruway Authority. I apologize, I was on mute earlier.
Is there any way you can turn your volume up? We can't hear you.
Oh, okay, can you hear me now?
That's better, yes.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, I apologize, I was on mute. So Andy Trombley had asked me to sit in on this, so I can provide a little bit of background if you would like on the project.
Sure.
Sure. So the Castleton on the Hudson Bridge was constructed, I'm sorry, let me, go back a second. So the bridge is, in our Albany division, it's, connects the thruway northbound and southbound Massachusetts Turnpike, eastbound and westbound. The bridge stands between the town of Selkirk, Albany County, and the town of Skodak, Rensselaer County. The project will rehabilitate, strengthen, deteriorated section of conditionally at-risk elements of the eastbound Castleton Bridge. The bridge is on the National Bridge Inventory. This project addresses the NBI 4 rated and quickly deteriorating fair rated elements of the eastbound bridge superstructure. Proposed work includes replacement of the eastbound structural deck with a new superstructure slab with integral wearing surface, steel repairs to girders for the approach stands and truss members of the truss stands, installation of a concrete approach slab at each bridge approach, modification to the existing concrete abutment at each approach, and replacement of non-conforming bridge rail with a steel floor rail TL4 system. So the authority completed a $47.6 million project of similar scope for the westbound bridge superstructure. With the completion of these two projects, the anticipated service life of the superstructure will be extended by 50 years. So the bridge, I mean, if we need a little more detail, the bridge is 5,300 feet long. It was built in 1958. The bridge was originally constructed to provide 25-foot wide roadway surface in each direction. And the bridge section is typically comprised of two 12-foot mainline lanes in each direction, 6-foot left shoulders and 3-foot right shoulders. The estimated two-way annual average daily traffic is about 17,000 with 28 to 30% truck volume. So those are the details of the project. So if you have any questions,
Thank you, Albert.
you're welcome.
Did everybody hear the bridge was built in 1958?
Was there, did he answer the expected life after the repairs?
Yes, 50 years.
50 years, okay.
So essentially, the improvements are such that you're doing everything but building a new bridge.
Yeah, I mean, we're handling all the steel repairs, deck repairs. Right, we're doing all the repairs to essentially get the bridge back into good condition and expected service life for 50 years.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, new project, new money coming in, not using existing money. Will this now be eligible for future drawdowns?
That's a good question. I mean, it's not to say it's not going to be eligible. The likelihood of that happening, we can't predict, but the bridge improvement program funds are capped. It is a one-time award. My hunch is they would probably use throughway funds to fill any funding out, but you never know. They are eligible to approach the table for any other cost increases to the project.
With just the construction funding, they would already be under construction while this was going on. I don't think the timeliness would even allow them to come back
Probably not.
to the body for while the work was underway. I would presume it would need to be funded in-house.
Probably. I would agree with that.
Sandy, that was my question. Is it throughway eligible to come to the table for
Yes.
funding? They just have not.
Yeah, let's segue into our little workshop. I mean, organizations like the Thruway and even the Airport Authority, I mean, they're both eligible to apply for federal funds. In recent years, they haven't done so. You know, in the case of the airport, Albany County's kind of led the lead, you know, taking the lead on things like the Exit 3 project or other, off-property projects, we'll call it. But clearly, you know, the Airport Authority coordinates with the county to, you know, ensure that those projects, the Thruway is a little different, right? Because they have sort of their own funding, their own revenue. I don't even know how much they, you know, coordinate with DOT on some things, but maybe you could speak to that, Bob.
I mean, there are a lot of times where we have a share of one of their projects, either the wearing surface is owned by DOT and the structure is owned by the thruway or whatever. And generally the participation is in the construction phase as well, and not for the design. Because you would need to have traditional design approval documents like we do for federal aid projects and the environmental process. When traditionally they've done that in-house. And then say there are federally funded thruway projects that have happened in the past, but
Right.
for the most part, they tend to operate and stuff. The ability to bond for themselves and generate revenue is different than the state agencies that they're not subject to the budget process the same way that we.
Any other questions?
I'll move it.
Patrick, second? All right, all in favor? All those opposed or abstained? Hearing none, motion passes and goes to the policy board. All right, now next up, going right through, we have a presentation by Carrie regarding the coordinated public transit human service transportation plan of the capital region. That's a mouthful.
We talked about this at our last meeting in August. We are going to be asking you to approve the draft document for release for public review at today's meeting. So I just wanted to give a little bit of presentation on more the conclusions in the document. That's fine. Just to recap, the definition of what this is the locally developed coordinated transportation plan that identifies the transportation needs of individuals with disabilities, older adults, and people with low incomes, and provide strategies for meeting those local needs, also prioritize those specific services for funding and implementation. And besides the fact that it's required, we do this because the 5310 project, since for enhanced mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities, must be included in our coordinated plan. And then also to note that the coordinated plan is required to be developed and approved through a process that included participation by seniors, individuals with disabilities, and representatives of human service providers. Talked a little bit about what we did for that in our last presentation in August. Next. All right, so these are the kind of conclusion type things at the end of the document that I didn't really talk about in August. Recent initiatives that relate, states or other initiatives that relate to human services transportation. The New York State Study to Design a Mobility Management Project was the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities held the contract for that. It was included in our last document. As far as I can tell, nothing has happened with it, but it did have discrete recommendations that our regional institution thinks are still important. So we still want to include it here. The National Aging and Disability Transportation Center funded Colony Senior Services to expand their service provision in the city of Watervliet and also in Minneapolis. That went on for I think about a year. It just concluded this past June as a kind of a pilot project, and so now they're looking for funds to continue being able to provide those expanded services. Saratoga County Transportation Task Force is really spearheaded by Captain Community Human Services, looking at improving service coordination, mostly for people with lower incomes and older adults in Saratoga County, but inclusive of people who have disabilities. They've been able to get a couple of grants, more from United Way, more from somewhere else, to work on that. So there is some local interest in that task force. The village movement has been supported by the state and also by the Albany Guardian Society. Relatively recently, villages are membership-based organizations where people, for older adults, you pay in and then you can be provided with services, and it's kind of they exist nationally, and the most often requested service is transportation for those. And then the New York State Transportation Network Company Accessibility Task Force is a task force of a number of state departments, including the Department of Transportation, that finished also during our last coordinated plan update. And as far as we can tell, nothing is happening with it. But it is still really important, to our advisory group for this, that, Lyft and Uber vehicles have accessible options, which they don't really, and I was in our region. Next slide. So the needs, in this realm are, equipment, organization, and rider service needs, wheelchair accessible vehicles, software and hardware, and also that, the ability for accessibility in the, taxis and transportation network companies. The organizational needs, drivers is still a huge issue, both recruiting and retaining them. Vehicle maintenance, including maintenance of wheelchair lifts and ramps. Sometimes the vehicle's working, but the wheelchair lift isn't. Driver and maintenance training, and then managing demand on Star trips are more expensive per rider than fixed route trips, and also for not everyone, but for some riders, there's more of a sense of freedom if they can use the fixed route. They don't have to schedule the trip 24 hours ahead of time. Rider service needs, there is often a lack of knowledge about existing services, and then also a lack of knowledge about how to use existing services, which is where the travel training comes in. Next slide, service gaps really center around weekend services and also rural services. Next slide. Barriers to coordination include funding silos, so different funding sources have different requirements for different things. It makes it hard to coordinate. Accounting systems are often not interoperable, so it's not possible to bill each other for rides and to accept each other's, to provide services to each other's clients. Lack of public information on available services, and then oftentimes potential riders are either unfamiliar or uncomfortable using fixed routes for shared services, which is where we come to the need for travel training. And then also potential riders are often have a fear of potentially riding with people who have a developmental disability or a mental illness, so they don't want to use available services. And this also impacts the ability of our providers for people with developmental disabilities to be able to, coordinate with other providers. Next slide. You can skip that. It is at the end of the document, we have a number of strategies and actions, prioritizing for the 5310 fund source are some items here that would make it easier for providers to coordinate. We have been providing workshops for providers of human services transportation every couple of years with presenters and an opportunity for them to network. And then these other things are just ones that I picked out because I thought they might be of most interest to this group. So facilitating completion of ADA transition plans and physical improvements for pedestrian infrastructure. When we did the public survey, a lot of people are walking for their transportation. Incentivizing or continuing to incentivize inclusion of accessible feature-laden transportation and improvement program projects. Improving the location of different siting of facilities and housing for transportation disadvantaged populations. This is an issue for providers because as things move further apart, it's more distance and they can't provide as many trips to as many people. And it's harder for people to walk or use non-service types of transportation. And then best practices for public charging for electric mobility devices, as we're talking more about electric vehicles and electric car charging in a public sense, and also like bike sharing or scooter sharing in electric vehicles. There's an opportunity there to make sure that people who are using electric wheelchairs or other kinds of mobility devices have an ability to not have range anxiety as well for their. I think that's the last slide.
All right, thank you, Carrie. And we are going to need a motion, but before that, any questions for Carrie?
I was at a meeting recently where a lot of people were complaining about items that are on this. One in particular is the desire to age in place and the lack of urban locations for that. And
Housing choice.
yeah, housing choice. And when a vehicle is needed for a doctor's appointment or something, or a specialized vehicle to transport the individual to a doctor's appointment or something, that that was time sensitive. Even calling for the 24-hour advance notice, they could be shut out. And I was wondering if there was any information relative to percentage of people requesting viable transportation options, not being able to receive it due to circumstances.
Yeah, that is something that we have talked about in our regional distribution coordination committee, which is our advisory group for human services transportation providers. And we don't have the data on that. They don't, you know, they have data on trips that they've provided. But in terms of somebody calling and requesting a trip, that, and if it's not available or they just don't provide it in that area, then they may refer them to somebody else, that doesn't tend to get reported. So, you know, I don't even know if like CBTA would have information on full information that would really help us at a regional planning level understand what you're getting at is like unmet need.
And relative to star availability, well, star availability and driver and mechanic. Can you speak a little bit more on that? Because what I'm hearing is it's pretty dire.
Driver, mechanic, 4-star.
Well, in general, drivers and mechanics for special transportation needs. So
Yeah.
population doesn't. It's low, very low.
We've had issues with participation at our group because the people who work in the office have been driving. So the people who would normally come to our meetings, will they'll call me and they're the driver. So there's just a huge problem in hiring, recruiting and retaining different issues, but they're both a problem. We have also had some significant changes that started before COVID, but continued over with agencies either stopping providing transportation or stopping their transportation program. It may not mean that they're not providing transportation, but they're using non-driver staff to provide trips to people. And then leasing vehicles or having contracts with like a garage or somebody else to maintain their vehicles. So they don't have a transportation budget anymore, but they are still paying for some of those services.
Where do volunteers come into play, you know, on volunteer drivers, et cetera? Because years ago, I don't know if it still exists in Scotland, we set up a program. Volunteer drivers, we had car available. We had a person in town hall who, you know, took care of seniors' requests, and she just hop into the car that was donated and pick up somebody if they had a last minute, you know, trip or something like that. And I'm not sure if that program still exists, but it was very effective, and it used basically a lot of volunteers in the community to drive, and it wasn't, you know, I mean, it doesn't address the special vehicle need, but it does address the need, you know, for a senior who get in a sedan or a DOT bus, which we got, you know, use of not just paid staff, but volunteer, because there's a whole bunch of folks that are retired and would, you know, maybe need training or something, you know, as a pool of people to transport people.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a part of the puzzle. A number of towns in the region, I believe, use volunteer drivers, but we also have community caregivers in Albany County, which is just a volunteer provider, and then the Captain Community Human Services has a program that they had taken over that is from the same model.
Yeah, we're in the cap.
Origin Fund that provides volunteer transportation. So it's definitely an important piece of the puzzle, but it can also be a little bit less reliable if the volunteer can. The work for me is like I'm in Florida or whatever. And then,
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Very good questions. If there's none other, we'll need a motion to release the plan for public review. Andrew, second. Patrick, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstained? All right, hearing none. We're gonna go over to the Transportation Planning Study Solicitation, the FY 24-25 UPWP, and I'll turn it over to Sandy.
Great, thanks, Joe. So we're at that time of year again where we are seeking proposals from our members, local governments, community members for transportation planning support for next year, beginning April 1st of 2024. There you go. Just as a reminder, this is for our Unified Planning Work Program, where we have a listing of all of our planning activities, who's doing the work, the timeframes, the budgets, et cetera. We're making available about $300,000 in federal planning funds this year. Reason being is that we programmed a lot last year. Many of those planning activities are not done yet. Some have just actually started 6 months into the year, so we expect there to be a lot of carryover. But we do have some reserve of funds that we think we can assign to new activities for the upcoming year. Eligibility, again, all the cities, towns, villages, counties, our members. We can have co-applicants if there's a not-for-profit group in your community that's interested in working on something. So long as you, the lead applicant, has that given them that support. We can coordinate planning work with those folks. And intermunicipal cooperation coordination is always encouraged and benefits you in the scoring process. So the way we're outlining sort of 3 buckets of opportunity this year, we folded our Complete Street Municipal Workshop solicitation into this. So you may recall that we offer this educational and technical assistance sort of training program in which we hire a consultant to work with the municipality to host a sort of an internal workshop in which all of the local government folks gather to talk about opportunities and constraints related to implementing Complete Streets policies or Complete Streets projects in communities. There's a separate application for the Complete Streets workshops. The nice part about these is that they're technically free. The obligation on the part of the interested municipality is that you provide some staff time, you help with logistics, provide meeting space, that sort of thing. But it's technically free for you. Albany County is going to be hosting a county-wide workshop this year, this fall actually. So we're trying to encourage communities in Rensselaer, Schenectady, and Saratoga County first to apply for these funds. If for some reason there is a community in Albany County that maybe isn't going to be participating in the countywide workshop for whatever reason, then we would consider that as funds allow. So that's the first bucket. The second is our technical assistance work. This is our small scale staff level planning work where we can work with communities on, very targeted planning topics. We're working with Mechanical right now as an example on a project at Depot Square where we're doing a demonstration project on a new intersection configuration that's kind of complete streets and safety oriented. We're working with Saratoga Springs on collecting some data related to trucks. So it can be a wide range of activities that we use these funds for, but if there's a specific need by a member, you're welcome to submit the request. Now, we do have the ongoing technical assistance program that we'll continue to support throughout the year, but this would help just to get any specific request right into the UPWP upfront. The match requirement is 10% of the actual project cost, which we can work with you to estimate. And that can be in the form of in-kind services, or it can also be in the form of cash. In-kind actually is probably easier for most people. So I would assume for these small scale initiatives, staff time would be really all that's required. As you can learn more about sort of the eligible types of activities and see the range of things we funded through the technical assistance program on our website. And then the third bucket is the kind of community planning linkage program studies. These are the larger strategic plans we work with and have worked with many of you on over the years. Neighborhood plans, corridor studies, zoning, active transportation plans, whole range of activities and concepts. We've capped the requests at $150,000. Again, there's a 10% in-kind or cash contribution. Overmatches, help in the evaluation process again. Intermunicipal work helps in the evaluation process, but we'll have an opportunity to fund a couple of new planning studies in the region through that. So as I said, there's a separate job form application this time around for the Complete Streets workshop, a little simpler. Technical assistance and the planning studies go through a different job form. But both of the forms have the basic, applicant information, basic project information, proposed budget, proposals or some requirements on, a letter of support or, a commitment from your lead elected officials, those sorts of things. The evaluation criteria remain unchanged from last year, and you can review them in the guidance document. But they kind of focus again on how well they implement our long-range plan, environmental justice locations, local support, these kinds of things. So key dates. So after today's meeting, assuming you all approve this for release, we will formally release it on Friday. We just want to sort of dot the i's and cross the t's. We just got to add in some links to the draft document that's in your packet. October 18th, we'll hold a brief virtual sponsor workshop just to kind of run through the process and answer any specific questions you may have. You are welcome to reach out to us at any time. If you have a question about a proposal, you have an idea and you're not really sure where it fits in, feel free to reach out to us. Applications are going to be due December 1st. We'll evaluate them, bring some initial recommendations to you folks in January. And then that will all get fed into our broader unified planning work program document, which will be coming to the planning committee in February and the policy board in March. So that is basically the quick summary of the solicitation. Any questions?
All right, hearing none, we're gonna need a motion to release this. I'll second that. All right.
That was Laura and I think Tom. Okay, thank you.
All in favor? Opposed? All right, motion passes. Moving on to discussion items, TIP performance project selection changes, Jacob?
So, right, every month we talk about our project selection changes, which again are small changes to schedule or cost changes to TIP projects that we can make without amendments. This month, we kind of have it split up into two different sections. The first one is our STIP performance project selection changes. So many of you have probably heard about this before, or I've talked to you in the past month about it, but just for a little background. Each year, at the start of a new federal fiscal year, Federal Highway kind of takes a snapshot of that particular federal fiscal year. And STIP performance means that they're going to be evaluating us on how many of those construction phases are actually authorized compared to what's there at the beginning of the year. So, it's called unamended STIP performance actually. So what's there in the beginning of the year is what they kind of compare it to at the end in terms of construction authorizations. So we do this exercise before the new federal fiscal year starts. To try to get a handle on project schedules before the start of the year so that we can move those projects that we think aren't going to get authorized. We can move them out ahead of time, therefore improving our STIP performance. So I sent emails out to all the local project sponsors, well, local and DOT. So all project sponsors that had construction in federal fiscal year 2024 and asked on the expected schedule. We ended up moving out a total of 24 projects or construction phases for 24 projects. We moved them out of federal fiscal year 24. 21 of those projects were moved into federal fiscal year 25. That's about $51 million. 2 of the projects were moved into federal fiscal year 26, so accounting for about $12 million. And actually 1 project was moved back into federal fiscal year 2022. It was already obligated, it was DOT project. So, but in total, we moved about $63 million out of the current federal fiscal year 24. So in terms of SIP performance, we should be, in good shape. However, it just kind of leads to another, kind of point to make that, we are seeing a lot of projects slide, project schedules, so pushing all that funding into, kind of a further year out on the tip. Just something that we kind of need to keep an eye on. It could, when comes time for a tip update, ultimately we kind of program out rolling. So the more rolling that we have coming from this tip to the next tip, there's a potential for less new programming. So just wanted to kind of point that out in terms of tip step performance. So we have a list of all of the projects that we moved here. Again, many of you, if we moved one of your projects, we've probably talked multiple times in the past month, but just wanted to highlight these as all of the final project moves that we made in terms of tip step performance. The second worksheet, unless you.
I just wanted to just briefly, I just came back from our National MPO Association conference, and this issue of the obligation of federal funds is a nationwide challenge. In the sense that, they did a report to highlight some of the reasons, the causes of why things are getting pushed out. So some of which we all know, right? There's staffing shortages all up and down, federal, state, local government. We all know that. We know inflation has impacted the cost of these projects. We know materials availability has impacted the cost of these projects. But other factors are sort of sponsor priority, right? Sometimes we get things put on the tip on the program and they don't even get touched, even once the year in which they are sitting there, that first year, whether it's their design year, the preliminary, whatever the phase is, sometimes the action doesn't happen quickly. This is a conversation I think we're going to bring to the tip task force. Some MPOs, and I'm not saying that this is what we want to do, but some MPOs have put more teeth into their process by actually putting some more restrictive time limits, milestones. If you don't hit certain milestones after so many years, you start risking your federal aid, and I'm not suggesting we do that, but I think it's a conversation that, we do need to have, because the impact of the continued rollover of things, may not sitting here today matter, but when we get to that tip update and everybody was wondering why there's only $30 million to program for new things, this is why, right? So I just wanted to make sure that, we all keep that in mind. And, I think the tip task force will be a topic that we'll discuss.
I think, Sandy hit it right on the head. I think unamended STIP performance is not really something we lose sleep over right now, worried about it here. Things happen around the table. As projects were ready, we would have been able to deliver them and get them out the door. The issue is going to be with the new update. All of a sudden, it's not new money to be programmed if we're rolling in a couple $100 million of it. I could say for DOT statewide, every region is about a year's worth of over program between the state projects and the local projects. But there has not been any sort of, let's get the knife out and cut a particular project. You're still committed to the family of projects that were approved with the last program update. So, if 5 years becomes 6, it's that 6th year, it becomes the rollover, and whatever new money's in the next bill, it's going to absorb a big chunk of that. So, for this particular report, it's not the big thing, but the bigger story is that and what's going on. And just like, the TAP CMAP or unobligated ones, the feds do come looking back to us for unobligated phases on projects to real, because that becomes how big they can make in the next announcement in the bill with how much hasn't been spent. So.
Yeah, thank you. And
No, if I can throw this back too, I think the contracting is important too. For instance, I'll use a Co's example. We have a $750,000 design bill and we cannot get reimbursements, but we're still moving ahead right now because the contract's not fully executed. So I know that's been a problem, not just with this group of projects, but most federal projects I'm working with right now. So that does delay people in general that don't have the ability to take that financial hit.
yeah, and we may not be able to come up with solutions for some of this, but I think it's a discussion worth having, because if there's some way that the MPO and our staff can maybe help provide some capacity support somehow. And I don't know, I don't have the answers, but it's worth having that conversation. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sandy, having been involved in a lot of double-A projects in the past, one of the bigger problems has been right away.
Yep.
Right away acquisition and so on. That seems to take a lot of time and effort.
Yeah, that's definitely an issue that was cited in that report as well.
Somehow streamline that process. That would be a great benefit to the project.
Any discussion about, bid prices coming in high and quality of contractor being low?
The contractor side came in more from the perspective of staffing shortages. Even in the consultant world, we're hearing from many that there's just not enough people to do all this work that's being put out there. We're starting to see it here even on the planning side, where before we would get 5 or 6 local firms to submit on a community planning study. Now we're getting 1 or 2 because people don't have the personnel. So it's not necessarily maybe the quality, but the quality is probably being impacted just by the lack of staff and the lack of people doing the work.
All right, no other questions? Moving on, Jacob, you're still up.
Yeah, so just kind of the second piece of that table, I'm calling this more of our normal project selection changes. It came to us, we'll say organically outside of the TIP performance. Town of Wilton Traffic Safety and Pedestrian Connectivity Project, just kind of moved some funding around, pulled it out of construction, added some right-of-way phases, and did actually adjust, I think, the construction here as well, pushing it out. So kind of helped with the TIP performance before we got to it, so, for informational purposes.
All right, Jacob, you're still going.
Project tracking. So project tracking, this is kind of, or project delivery update, this is kind of on the same thread, actually. So as many of you know, right, each month we, provide a list of all of our, local TIP projects with, expected schedules and timelines. I need to get back on my schedule of reaching out to local sponsors. But what I have done, for this month, we've gone through and added all of the new local projects that have design starting in 2024. So I think there's a handful, 6 or 7 new local projects that have design starting in 2024. So now you're kind of on the list, so to speak. And in general, just kind of want to ask for if you all are kind of looking through that list, any of your projects that you have updates on, even if I'm not reaching out to you, we're always, happy to hear, if you're being proactive and say, hey, listen, actually, I don't think that we can get to design this year, we can move it out. Any kind of thoughts on scheduling and things like that, the earlier we get that information, the better. So as always, feel free to take a look at that list. Let me know if you have any thoughts or changes. If you completed SLA or brought a consultant on board, we like to know that as well. So that's my project delivery.
We'll post the document that it was handed out here in the room following you.
All right, any questions for Jacob? Hearing none, we're gonna move on. Bob's got a nice project delivery schedule, okay?
Yeah, just quickly, I generally the third quarter is the lighter of in terms of our number of lettings. So we're a couple our signal requirements job, signal maintenance, and then a bridge painting project. Both were close to the estimate, but to Andrew's point, I mean they're probably 20% more than they were a couple of years ago. Between now and the next planning committee, really just one signal replacement project coming up, a couple signals on Western Ave and Gilder Lane, and that the I-90 at exit 7 in Washington Ave and Rensselaer to be replaced with a letting 9th of November. That's all I have in terms of lettings right now.
All right, thanks, Bob. Sandy, status of regional transportation planning initiative.
And just quickly, we have planning studies that will be hitting public involvement phases this fall. We'll do a 4-quarter study in East Greenbush, the Brunswick Hoosick Road study in the town of Brunswick on Route 7, Sand Creek Road feasibility, complete street study will also be at that point. Likely, I think we're finishing up the Albany Crane Street study in Schenectady as well. So we'll have a lot of planning activity going on in which we're seeking public input. We also just released the RFP for the Safe Streets and Roads for All planning grant. So consultants be looking for that. And we'll be wrapping up our regional truck parking study that was already previously presented to this group earlier this year. And we'll be talking more and more about the long range plan update in upcoming meetings, as now we're getting to the time where we're really going to start putting some pen to paper or some digital things to apps, because it's not really pen to paper anymore. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Sandy. Regional local planning updates, going back to Sandy for the Transportation Council.
And not much more to add. Again, just based off of Carrie's presentation, given the topic, and we know that, that it's a tough topic. It's a dense document, but if you do know folks who would be interested in reading more, we're really seeking public comment during this next month. We'll have some tools out there for folks to share. If you can help us distribute that to your networks via social media, if you have community newsletters, whatever you might have, that would be really helpful.
Awesome. Updates from CDRPC. We have Mark on still.
Hey, thank you, sir. So we're beginning to roll out, working with stakeholders to roll out our EPA climate pollution reduction grant activities. So Todd Fabozzi on our team is leading those efforts. This multi-year grant fund will fund regional climate action planning and support local implementation projects. So be on the lookout for more information from our sustainability team. We are hosting our annual workshop on October 20th at Hudson Valley Community College. Registration is open through middle of next week, I believe. So get your registrations in. We are working on our population projections now that the age cohort data is available from the decennial census. We'll be reaching out to key stakeholders to sort of ground truth our projections to make sure they account for local growth patterns. And we are proceeding with some regional broadband planning and working to coordinate with Schenectady, Rensselaer, and Saratoga counties on some of that stuff. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks much.
Thank you, Mark. One question for you. The EPA climate grant, is that going to be something that is going to be solicited from CDRPC or kind of driven by CDRPC?
Well, it will be both because there's a planning aspect related to the climate action planning. And we are, like I said, in the process of convening and coordinating with our stakeholders on the planning aspect. At the end of last week, the federal government did announce implementation funds related to the planning. So it's going to be an iterative process building on the planning process that will lead to the identification of some key and I think, most impactful implementation projects later on.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Megan with CDTA.
Sure. We're launching our third BRT route in November 5th exactly. So a lot of work going into that. And sometime in the coming weeks, we'll also have our Gateway Mobility Center and Schenectady opening up. Updates.
Thank you. Moving along, Bob, nice up.
I know Sandy shared, but at the TAP CMAC as well as CRP is the third component of that. The solicitation is out. The application will be due in January the 9th. Webinar and it's on the website. I'm not sure if they've been scheduled yet, but they'll be upcoming, as well as draft applications will come in as well for sort of pre-review. As Sandy mentioned, I mean, between the collective partnerships around the table as well as our consultant partners, we always do very well in those and expect that to continue. In terms of staffing, our traffic engineer, Mark Pascaldo, has officially retired. Interviews are ongoing now, and hopefully by the next planning committee, we'll have a new traffic engineer. I don't know if anybody knows, Nick Chuba, the chief engineer for DOT, is also retired. Stephanie Winkelhoff, I probably butchered her name. Stephanie's acting now in a place there. And in our shop, Kaylee Knoll has started with us. She's working with Valerie Dean in terms of the CHIPS program. So I need to have to deal with that. So just some staffing changes, ongoing staffing changes.
All right, thanks, Bob. Do you have anyone from the Thruway Authority still on? All right, we're gonna move on. Connor with the Albany County Airport Authority.
Thanks. So we were thankful to have a policy board presentation for the master plan that's ongoing, last meeting. We are looking to finalize that and send it to the FAA by the end of November of this year. Final rounds of public meetings are going to be hosted towards the end of October. Those dates are going to be published here in a couple of weeks, or probably within the next week, actually. While a lot of the recommendations are inside the fence, as we would like to call it, a lot of our runway airfield geometry, there was some preliminary enhancements that were proposed for the main intersection into the airport. So I think after that is finalized by the FAA, that's something that we might want to carry on further in the future for maybe a more isolated study for that. So it's pretty much.
All right, thanks, Connor. Pat with the Albany County or Albany Port District Commission.
Sure. Last week we had a nice ribbon cutting and putting back online what we call shed one, it's what we call warehousing. It's along the waterfront. It's our oldest building, built in the late 1920s, full rehab, thanks to a nice grant from DOT. We had the city and DOT on hand to cut the ribbon along with some local electeds. That puts 58,000 square foot building back on our plan, so that we can accept more ships and then output more trucks and rail, because it's all covered and now new roof, new electric, floor space, and fire suppression systems, and all rehab with about 90% women-owned businesses. So we were very happy to put that plan into process. Otherwise, we are almost done rehabbing the 20 acres of the terminal. I think we have another week or two of pavement and that'll be done. And probably in about a month, Smith Boulevard, which is the port's main access road, will have completed its full reconstruction. That went down about 2.5 feet down. And then, well, yesterday there was about an 8-foot trench outside of my office going all the way down under the sewer. So I mean, literally soup to nuts. So we can continue with the kind of the heavy pounding that the port roads take. And on the expansion process or project, the cap on the site is almost complete, and we are just working with DOT on a final permit on the roadside. And once we get that, we'll be working on River Road in Glenmont and up into the Albany area on reconfiguring some of the intersections that will lead into the site and into the port itself. So we're kind of firing on all cylinders right now.
Some of the stuff going on.
Thanks. So
Thank you. Anyone else for local government updates?
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce Alexandria. Alexandria Carver is our new Director of Development at the City of Schenectady, replacing Kristen Diaz. So you will probably see her around quite a bit. I don't know if you want to say anything about your background or anything like that, but you know, Kristen in the city and our departments, engineering development, work hand in hand. So this is her first experience with this group, so I thought it'd be good, especially with the lunch and learn coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, hearing nothing else, just some upcoming meetings. The Active Transportation Planning Advisory Committee is meeting on October 10th. The UPWP solicitation webinar, October 18th. The next planning committee meeting is November 1st, and the Regional Transportation Coordination Committee is November 6th. If there's no other comments, questions, we'll look to adjourn the meeting with a vote.
Oh, I had a quick question about the November 1st meeting. There's a conference that day that I think a lot of us might be at. I'm just wondering if
What conference is it?
the transportation. NIPTA, yeah.
Oh, NIPTA.
Yeah.
How many of you in the room are going to NIPTA?
Maybe just that.
Yeah, I mean, if it's just, unfortunately, but, thank you for mentioning that.
Let's see, nothing else. Looking for a motion to adjourn. The second. All right, all in favor? Thank you, guys.
For those sticking around for the workshop, we are providing a light lunch. We're hoping to start the meeting somewhere between 11:30 and 11:45. For those listening in remotely, there is a separate Zoom link for that. So check your Outlook meeting calendar for that information, and we will reconvene shortly. Thanks, everybody.